Som veľmi rád, že sa nám podarilo získať Steva, pretože jednak je úžasný človek, veľmi príjemný. Potom je vynikajúci kreatívec, európsky globálny kreatívny riaditeľ. A okrem toho roky študuje Howarda Gossagea, ktorý bol najväčší pánkač v 50. a 60. rokoch. A práve v dnešnej dobe je veľmi inšpiratívny a veľa sa od neho môžeme naučiť aj o tom, ako robiť reklamu lepšie. Tak privítajte so mnou Steva Harrisona.
Thank you. Thank you. You can all hear me. Thank you very much indeed. What I'm going to say is primarily, I think, to endorse everything that Michael and Stanislavska said before lunch, a presentation which I thought was absolutely wonderful. If they're still here, thank you very much for that. I'm going to talk to you about a man called Howard Gossage. And if you haven't heard of him, it's no wonder. I don't blame you. Howard Gossage was a copywriter and agency owner from 1957 to 1969. So his career as an agency owner with his own shop only lasted for 12 years. When he died in 1969, he left no television work. He didn't do any TV, so there's nothing for you to see on YouTube in grainy black and white or saturated color. His agency was only 12 people strong, and when he died, they wound up the agency. So unlike Burnett or Birnbach or Ogilvy, there was nobody to take on the mantle and to keep that name alive. And so, as I say, if you've never heard of Howard Gossage, you're in the vast majority. But I would suggest that you do get to know him. This is something that Rory Sutherland, who is probably the UK's most intelligent advertising observer, Rory, and this is what he said. He told me this. Rod has said that Gossage is the Velvet Underground to Ogilvy's Beatles and Birnbach's Rolling Stones. Never a household name, but to the cognoscenti, much more inspirational and influential. Here's what one of the cognoscenti said. I hope you've heard of Jeff Goodby, the founder of Goodby Berlin and Silverstein, probably America's most successful advertising agency for the past 40 years. Jeff, who was a great ally in mine in the research I did into Howard Gossage, I'll tell you about that later, but more importantly, he turned this gentleman on to Gossage, of probably the second most successful American advertising agency of the past 40 years, Wieden & Kennedy. Those of you with a long enough memory will know that, but by far, the most outstanding agency in the world in the digital era, at the start of the digital era, was Crispin Porter Boguski, if you remember them, Crispin Porter. And Alex Boguski said that before every brief, his agency would sit around and ask themselves, what would Gossage do? Okay. But I am citing Jeff Goodby's 73, Dan Wieden passed away 2 years ago, Crispin Porter are no longer the strength, the power that they were. So is Gossage relevant to us now? You know, kind of to today. I would suggest probably more so, and I would posit this this is why we need Howard Gossage. If you look at that quotation, stunningly depressing quotation, that's an observation about the UK ad industry, but there may be aspects of that here in Slovakia. And that assessment came from no less than Tim Lindsay, the chairman of D&AD. D&AD, you'll be familiar with, are supposed to be the custodians and champions of great creative work. And that's Tim's assessment of the situation. Okay, so I think that we desperately need Howard for two reasons. I think that the industry, and this is an observation about the UK and the US, but again, it might apply to you people here. And if it doesn't, it will, because this trend, I think, will get to you if it hasn't already. The first problem we have is something called hyper-targeting, whereby we bought the Markham's spiel about the beauty of being able to target our messages at each individual personally, so that when they're sitting on the toilet having a crap, they pull out the one set of toilet paper and they get a message on their phone saying, actually use this one instead, that we can deliver our message so personally at the right. We were talking last night about the timing, the targeting, etc. And this is all we need for advertising. I think that's the death of brands, personally, and I'll explain why when we're talking about Howard later. So hyper-targeting has been a damaging myth, I think, in our industry. And in my industry, hyper-seriousness, whereby in about 2012, the advertising community in the UK and around the world stopped selling and started saving the world. And all of the fun that Michael and Stanislavska were talking about, which is so successful, was leached out of our messaging in order to make us feel absolutely depressed, about the state of the world and about you. And 2022 was the high watermark of this, where at the Cannes Lions, 85% of Grand Prix went to social purpose and cause-related work, 85%. Only 15% went to stuff that was actually selling something. And you can bet that there wasn't much fun and laughter in those 85%. Okay. So I think that we need Howard Gossage, and we need more presentations like Michael and Stanislavska's as well. Because as one of our wise people, Dave Trott, who is, again, like Rory, probably one of our most clever observers of the UK and the advertising scene in general, says this: the answer is to make it fun. Okay. And another of our wise people, Sir John Hegarty of Bartle Bogle Hegarty, probably our greatest advertising agency in the past 40 years. And I went to see Sir John at an awards ceremony, the Caples Awards, last year, and he was interviewed on stage. And the interviewer asked him, what do you think it is? What special secret do you have that has made you successful? I mean, and he said, well, what kind of ads do you like that work with you, and why do you think you're advertising? What is the secret of the ads that you've done that have been most successful? And John thought about it for a while and said, irreverence. And irreverence is not taking seriously the things that people tend to take seriously, to poking fun at things, to having a bit of a joke at things and not being too serious, taking serious subjects and twisting them so that actually you can see the humor in them. Okay, and irreverence was the secret. Okay, so, and I think that Howard Gossage knew that in spades, but we're talking, as Dan Wyden said, he was doing this 50 bloody years ago. And this is what Howard used to do. Oh, no, I've forgotten Paul Feldwick, who is our wisest planner. If you're a strategist here, I hope you've heard of Paul with The Anatomy of Humbug and his latest book, Why Does the Peddler Sing? And Paul is convinced that we've lost the plot because we've become too sophisticated. We think that we're an art form, and we want to be recognized for our artistry. We're also in a bubble, and we want to be liked by people in our bubble. We are in a middle-class privileged bubble in the advertising world in the UK. And we tell, as Michael and Stanislavska warned against, we tell ourselves in jokes, things we get to the absolute, ignoring completely the mainstream and knockabout humor. kind of knockabout humor, and what Paul says is that advertising's roots lie with the hucksters and hawkers and barkers, the street market salesmen, the street traders who would pull their wares by attracting people with gimmickry and laughter, and by being entertaining. And he said it was their performance that made them stand out from the crowd, and their messages memorable. And in a riposte to today's proponents of social purpose and their po-faced advertising, he said that advertising works best when it is fun. Okay, so how does that relate to Howard? Howard said advertising is not a right, it's a privilege. So when we're invited into people's homes, either via whatever screen we're looking at, he said this. He said the buying of time or space on that screen or in that newspaper or on that cinema screen or whatever is not the taking out of a hunting license so that we've got them and we just fire our messages at them. He said that actually we've rented a stage upon which we perform for them. That's the way we should regard our relationship with our target audience. And even that word target audience, it does seem like the old hunting license, doesn't it? They're there to be shot at. Okay, so how did Howard keep the audience involved and entertained? Now, Howard was a late starter to this game, and he became a junior writer at Brisasher, Wheeler and Staff in San Francisco, a small agency in San Francisco, in 1955, a junior writer, and at that he was aged 36, so he was a 36-year-old junior writer. Okay, and as a junior writer, they gave him the Qantas account. He went to the creative director, and this is none of you are juniors, but this is great advice to any junior. Go to your creative director and say, "Give me the account no one wants to work on. Give me the dog of an account that nobody wants." Okay, and they gave him Qantas. Now, Qantas was the very little known Australian airline. Okay, with no budget. And the only budget they had was to do trade press advertising aimed at the New York trade, at travel agents. Okay. At the time, TWA, Transworld Airlines, the biggest airline in the world at the time, had just introduced the Super Constellation aircraft, which could do transoceanic travel. Europe, Far East, etc. And Qantas had invested in their own Super Constellation. Okay, they had the same aircraft, and they simply wanted to tell the travel agents that we've got this and try and sell more tickets on it. Okay, and so this was the brief given to Howard. So this was the ad, and TWA are spending $1.5 million on double-page spreads and posters showing the fabulous luxury to be enjoyed within the body of the plane, etc., and the lavish advertising. This is what Howard did: be the first one in your block to win a kangaroo. And he says we are pleased to, and what he says is that TWA have got. They've got this fabulous super constellation. Qantas has also got it, right? And we fly to 26 countries, etc. But we haven't got a name for it. We could call it the Super Constellation, but TWA have got that, and they've got their lawyers, and they probably wouldn't be too pleased about it. So he's having this chat with the reader. Okay, he does get them. You must bear in mind, Howard always had the commercial intent. By the third paragraph, he's saying what we really want is a name of our own, neat, evocative, alluring, a name calculated to send hordes of tourists to their travel agents, tourists brandishing fists of large notes, demanding to be sent via Qantas Super Constellation to Sydney, London, Johannesburg, Tokyo, or wherever. So the sales message is in there, but the fun element is in there as well, that we don't know what the name is. You do it for us. Now, I do believe that the digital people always promised us something to do with co-creation, and we could get our audience to help us with our creative problems. This was probably the first ever example of co-creation and open source creation that you've ever heard. But the open source here was the New Yorker magazine. So this was the ad was noticed by travel agents, of course, but the ad was also noticed by the press and the radio. And they thought, what the hell, we've not seen an ad like this. You know, TWA are doing standard communications, you know, advertising as we expected. What's this? Be the first on your block to win a kangaroo. And so it became famous. The ad became famous. And so Howard got what he wanted. Actually, that ad just went in the trade press. This was the ad Howard was after, the one that went in the New Yorker. Okay, and you can tell it's a New Yorker ad because it's got a James Thurber-like cartoon there, obviously to make it a little more arty, etc. But win a new 1955 kangaroo and no end of self-esteem. I'll tell you that when I'm talking about irreverence, I don't know whether any of you still use terms like, or are familiar with terms like call to action. You know, a call to action on an ad, in which is usually the standard for that would be reminding people the benefit that they might get and then asking them to reply very politely. Howard says on this one, while we don't like to be always complaining, it has come to our attention that some of you are not pulling your weight in this contest. Certain people, we mention no names, but we know who you are, have not sent in their entries. This is absolutely your last warning. Do you understand? Mail this coupon today. So what Howard was doing, I'll get on to what Howard was doing, he knew the formula for advertising. He knew the audience knew the formula for advertising, and he was saying, it's a load of bollocks, isn't it? Never mind the bollocks, it's only advertising. And he said, we're just taking the mickey out of it. Okay? And so this, having generated more responses, this was the end of it. New York child wins kangaroo. Her first. And I just love her first. You know, it's not that she's won a kangaroo, which is remarkable. The fact that this is the first one she's ever had is remarkable. You know, I'm sure we would have expected her to have several. So that launched Howard's career, and it turned him into an advertising star, still only on the West Coast in San Francisco. He then went on to do a follow-up campaign, which my colleague in the making of this book, Dave Dye, found. Dave Dye has got more pencils than a Crayola factory, is Dave. But I think he's on the spectrum, if you don't mind me saying. Well, you know, he's obsessive. Dave is fabulously obsessive, and he went through 10 years of New Yorker magazines from 1955 to 1966, every one of them to find new Howard Gossage ads. And ads I had no idea existed. This being one of them. This was the next campaign. And it is mad. It's so mad, even I can't understand it. So we'll skip. Anyway, Howard, it's in the book. See if you can understand it. You can win a kangaroo. You tell me what it's about, I'll give you a kangaroo. Howard then left. He left for British Wheeler and Staff, and got a new job, but only as an account man. He couldn't get a job as a copywriter. He got a job as an account man on the Nucoa margarine account. Nucoa was a famous margarine brand in the United States, and they briefed him to come up with some radio spots. And so he came up with some radio spots, but he ran this ad first in the New Yorker, of course, and it doesn't mention Nucoa, but it introduces you to Victor A. Dudley. Now, Victor A. Dudley was a sign writer who would write in California. He'd write things like, as he said, great, good eats, 50 girls, you know, everything must go. This is the kind of thing he'd normally been writing, but he'd taken a correspondence course in skywriting, you know, planes that used to be people would write things in the sky. And he was going to write Nucoa above the sky in Manhattan for on the Monday, and this ad ran on the Friday. And it was basically wishing him luck, because he'd never done it before. But hey, kind of he was game and a very ambitious fella, kind of good luck to him. And we'll be reporting on this. This is where the radio spots came in, which Nucoa thought would just be normal jingles, right? They were expecting a jingle, but the radio spots would be updates on how Dudley was going, interviews with him beforehand, interviews with him afterwards. And unfortunately, on Monday, he misspelled it. So they interviewed him afterwards, but he was going to have another try tomorrow. On Tuesday, he misspelt it. Nucoa with a K, or, kind of. On Wednesday, he ran out of whatever it was, so he got to Nuco, and then had run out of the steam stuff, so he got his Nuco. And by this time, the whole of bloody Manhattan, by Friday, it stops work at 1 o'clock in the afternoon going, come on, Victor, come on, man. And so this is generating news, this is generating radio stuff, etc. So much, but so had Howard just done the jingles for Nucoa, it might have kept the brand name top of mind for a week or 2 weeks. I'm sure the Michael and Stanislavska would tell you how effective that kind of approach would be, just doing a jingle. And if it was funny, that would be great. But this made headline news, okay? And everybody talked about it, everybody loved it, except for Nucoa, who, like clients the world over then and now, don't mess with their brand name. So Howard got fired, okay? And then he had no choice but to start his own agency. So he set up Weiner and Gossage in San Francisco in 1959, in 57, sorry. And this was his first account, one of his first big accounts. Fina Petrol was owned by the Belgian government, and they were a newcomer to the United States. And they'd been in the US for 6 years, and they were going up against Texaco, Esso, Shell, all those big American names, right? Well-established American gas companies or whatever. And they were competing with each other with high-octane, bombastic advertising about this special additive X will make sure it will clean your engine while it's moving, and this, kind of like yes, I know. We're still with Victor A. Dudley. It's only Wednesday. He's still misspelling it. And so this is called setting up the next ad. Where was I? Thank you. And all this high bombastic stuff. And his brief from Fina was just make sure everybody knows that we're a player, that we've got the oil refineries, we've got the pipeline, we've got the trucks, we've got the gas stations. We are a major player. We've only been here 6 years, but trust us, we're a major player. So this was Howard's response. Howard knew that buying gas was a utility purchase, that every gas was the same. You only stopped at a gas station when the needle was on E. So he sent up this whole thing about special additives, and he said that what we're going to do at Fina is we're going to start putting pink air in your tires. So if you need to fill your tires up, we are going to create a 6,000-mile pipeline which will spread across the whole of the United States, and by 1966 we will have furnished each of our 5,000 gas stations with the pink air that will enable you to fill up with pink air. Revolutionary added ingredient. Won't make any difference to the running of your car, but we think it's fabulous, and we're sure you'll all like it. Of course, it's all bollocks, but he said, we haven't got it now, but you can send for your free sample of pink air. If you can't wait until 1966, we'll send you your free sample of pink air. And so, dozens of thousands of people send for their free sample of pink air, right? To keep matters going, you'll see here. Oh, no, it isn't. It isn't. Anyway, so it would be in a minute, because you could send for your free valve cap, pink valve cap, to put on your tyre and everything. So we haven't got the pink air yet, but you can drive around with 4 little pink valve caps on there. Again, there is, behind all of this nonsense, there is a clever commercial intent, because what he would be selling you here were what were called the TBAs, tyres, batteries and accessories. So these were all the things you could buy in a Fina petrol station. Okay, so it was cross-selling, but I think that the best analogy I can get is, you know, when you go to an art gallery or a museum, exit the gift shop was how Gossage sold things. You go into a museum, you see the galleries and whatever, and you always leave via the gift shop, because by then you've seen the Klimt painting on the wall, and you want the tablecloth, right? You want the postcard. You've grown to like something enough to want to take it home with you, and this is Howard's approach to selling: exit via the gift shop. I'm treading on my lines, but he said people read what interests them, and sometimes it's an ad. So make it interesting. And make it likable. Make it likable, like this. Have you ever come across a more honest headline than that? Hey, you know, the hard sell, you know, kind of things go well with Shell. You know, put a tiger in your tank, you know, with Esso, or, you know, kind of Sammy Davis Jr. serenading you about Texaco and whatever. And this is, look, it's only gas. You know, if you can make yourself likable, as John Hegarty said, the flower salesman or the people, when they're laughing, they're buying. You know, and make yourself endearing. But please send me a pink valve cap. Please send me the credit card application. So there's always a commercial message at the end of it. You think that's honest? How about this one? Is it true that all brands of gasoline are pretty much alike? And you can guess what the answer was there. But, again, as we said, there's always a commercial, and it says, let me put my glasses on. It says, then bigness is something to do with whether a brand of gas is good or reputable. This is halfway through the Q&A. So bigness has something to do with whether a brand of gas is good or reputable. Fina, not altogether, but you have to be a certain size just to operate efficiently in an industry as huge as the oil business. That is, if you're a diversified company, which Fina is. Oh yes, in addition to thousands of stations down the middle of the country, we have pipelines, oil fields, 5 refineries, large petrochemical facilities, and we've done it all in 6 years. Say, does that sound like we're bragging? As a matter of fact, yes. So the sales message is there, but it's not sticking his finger in your chest. He's putting his arm around you and making you his friend and keeping you entertained. And there's a lot more Fina in the book. This is, I'll skip this because I'm probably, how much time have I got left, Richard? Oh, is it on there? 1 hour 55. 1 minute 55 left. Shit.
But you know, you're the star, so go on.
Right, okay. He was asked to do another, have you got any helium? He was asked to do a radio spot for Blitz Reinhardt beer. And again, they were probably expecting a jingle. This is what he came up with: a 25-minute musical comedy called Oregon. And this is the stage. It was a stage play, so to be staged at a theatre, and this is how it was advertised, I think, in New York. So they hired a theatre off Broadway, and they played Oregon, the 25-minute musical comedy. And if you couldn't get along to the stage play, it was an LP. So you could buy the long play LPs were records, things people listened to before Spotify. And incidentally, the whole thing was arranged by a man called Billy May. Billy May, in his spare time, was the conductor and arranger for Frank Sinatra, Nat King Cole, Ella Fitzgerald. There was no stinting on budget here. Again, they got fired as a result of this. Here's a client that didn't fire him. He was hired by the Irish Whiskey Distillers Association. I'll go back there, and then I'm going to set it up again, you see. So I'm not talking about Irish whiskey with this one. I'm talking about... and the Irish whiskey distillers came to Howard, and a series of like Tullamore Dew, Paddy, kind of whatever, 6 whiskey distillers. And they said, we've got a problem. We have never cracked the American market, and the only way we actually sell Irish whiskey is in Irish coffee. Irish coffee was actually invented in San Francisco, and it's coffee, loads of sugar, shot of Irish, double cream on top. And that's basically where all their volume sales were coming from. And they said, should we carry on, should we advertise by pushing, buy more, drink it this way, or should we sell it on the strength of how lovely Irish whiskey is? So Howard went and lived in Ireland for 9 months to absorb the crack, as the Irish say, to sit in pubs listening to people, to pick up the tone of voice, to read a lot of James Joyce, and to get them. And he said, I'm going to do advertising like nobody's ever done before. He told his art director. And this was the launch ad in the New Yorker, of course. Has Ireland been led false by a baked Brazilian berry? Now, this is introducing the idea that the coffee is the baked Brazilian berry. And off he goes in this Joycean stream of consciousness. And it's like you're sat in a pub in the Ring of Derry, out on the west coast of Ireland, in a bar that's been open all day, sitting with somebody who's been in there all week, talking at you, kind of with a glass of Irish whiskey in his hand. And as you will see here, the conversation is so good that he ends halfway through a sentence. And a week later, started the next ad halfway through, finished that sentence off. And this is how he introduced it. Oh, it's a horrid thing to be torn between pride and profit. Pride in the quality of Irish whiskey. Profit, can we make money by selling it as Irish coffee? So he's still making this, coming to terms with this dilemma when he ends halfway through that sentence and waits until the following week to finish this. And then he gets to this coupon. Tell me, are we for pride or are we for profit? Like I said about co-creation and getting the audience involved. He said, you tell us. I am for pride, tick, or I am for profit, tick, indicate one. Send it off to us, we'll send you a badge, pride or profit badge. Okay? But he still hasn't come to the end, and here we are now. And so eventually, after 4 launch ads, he eventually gets to the end, but only by shrinking his final words down to 4-point type. And actually then, not finish, he has to squeeze it on at the end here, which, funnily enough, ends in the word period, which is American for full stop. So that was how he launched the Irish whiskey distillers client in the United States. Again, to a lot of consternation in the media. People talked about this. People who've never drunk whiskey in their life were talking about this campaign. And that's one of the things about Howard, what he was absolutely a master of. He knew, and I mentioned this last night at the talk, that the job of advertising is that fame has an incalculable value, that that if you can make a brand famous, then that is hugely valuable. But you don't make a brand famous, and this goes back to my shtick about hyper-targeting, that you don't make a brand famous by simply talking to you because I know you are my target. I need to get you, who will never use the damn thing, talking about it. That is fame. That is fame, you know. So you two who will never drink Irish whiskey, talking about Irish whiskey, but you're an Irish whiskey drinker, will be very much encouraged to drink more of it because all these people are talking about your brand, you know. And there's a certain amount of status to be involved in using a brand that is famous. And we are also cautious, conservative consumers. We buy the brands that are most famous. The ones that people are talking about. You know, that's reassurance for us. This is follow-up ad. I imagine he's the first person ever to run a page blank before. So he bought the double page spread but didn't put any work on the left-hand side of the page. In the New Yorker, it cost a fortune to do it. And his rationale for that is just to show you how little we care for gold, because it's about don't call us profiteers. We're not here just to make money, you know. Just to show you how little we care for gold, you'll note we've engaged the page opposite and put nothing on it. Nothing on it at all, not even compliments of a friend. That shows how we don't care about money. So that was he wrote 3 campaigns. You know, very, very quickly, full copy between 1959 and 1961, and established Irish whiskey hugely in the United States. Now, have I got time to go on? How much longer? Yeah, okay. Just tell me when we've had enough. Okay. I'll skip this one, but I'll do this one. Howard was probably politically liberal, but socially conservative, and he loved his classical music. And as a kind of vanity client, he had a classical music station called KSFR, who played the classics and everything. Anyway, they were always running out of money, and they rang him and said, "We're going to have to close down, Howard. Can you get one of your clients to do some advertising with us? We need their money." And so Howard said, "Yes, of course." And he rang around a few of his clients, and he got Rainier Ale, a beer account, to pay for some advertising. And Howard's got the money wired to KSFR, kept them going for another 3 months, and then forgot all about the ads. Didn't do any. And on the Friday, KSFR ring him up and say, "Where are the ads, Howard? You know, have you done any? We're supposed to be going on air with them." And Howard said, "Oh God, I haven't got any." And like any good creative, he had a drawer full of things he'd seen in the newspapers before, things that quirky, you know, kind of attention-grabbing item, things that grabbed his attention, which he thought he could use in the future. And in there was this comic strip, and it was Peanuts, and it talks here about a Beethoven sweatshirt. Did anyone mention Beethoven sweatshirts? And so Howard went, KSFR, great. So he got in touch with another of his clients, Eagle Shirts. He said, "Can you put a picture on a sweatshirt?" And Eagle said, "No one's ever done it before." No one had ever screen printed anything on a sweatshirt or a T-shirt. No one had ever done that. You know, if you see pictures of Marlon Brando and James Dean, it's white T-shirts, black T-shirts, Steve McQueen sweatshirt, nothing on it. You know, those cool characters from the 50s and 60s. No one had ever screen printed onto a sweatshirt before. So Howard got this done, and he got Beethoven, Brahms and Bach on here, and the advertising that he did, they'd run about 200 of these off, expecting them to go absolutely, you know, kind of, at least we've done some advertising. And they did the radio spots, and they just flew out of the building. You know, people just loved them. The people from the devotees of classical music just loved them. And the demand was so great that they printed some more, and they did an ad. Be the first highbrow in your neighborhood to own a Beethoven, Brahms, and they flew out of the building. So eventually what they did, Howard says, well, we'll make, hey, it's only, I think his quote was, it's only money, we'll print 200,000 of them and do another ad. And they printed 200,000 of them, and they flew out of the building. In 1963, Wiener and Gossage made more money selling sweatshirts than they did doing advertising. Howard sent, a master of PR sent one to Leonard Bernstein, who was the conductor of the New York Symphony Orchestra and the most successful, famous conductor in the world, who immediately was spotted on the front of the New York Times wearing his. They just went, everyone was wearing. This lady here, this is Jane Fonda, who at the time was a happening actress just about to appear in Barbarella. And so, but people talk today about we want to be part of culture. You know, advertising must be part of culture. Well, Howard created a part of, and a fashion industry, essentially. And he was so buoyed by this that he then gets in touch with Pablo Picasso and says, can we start doing doing a collaboration with you? And so Picasso said, yeah. And so they start selling lines of Picasso work, which nowadays is quite commonplace. You know, people merchandise the shit out of all of their back catalogue of whatever it is. Then no one had done this before. No one had done this before. Can you afford a Picasso? You can now. You know, kind of. So again, way ahead of his time, making brands famous, involving people and making them laugh and entertaining them. Have I got time for any more? How did he get on with other members of the advertising fraternity? Not very well at all. He was a huge critic of advertising. He wrote articles like, is advertising worth saving? And came to the conclusion, no. He said it was a $14 billion hammer cracking a 15-cent nut, or tack, sorry. He said most of it was so rotten it should rot the paper that it appears in. So he didn't get on very well with any of his peers. But he got on well with David Ogilvy. He liked Ogilvy. And he took David Ogilvy's famous, are you familiar with it? 60 miles an hour, the loudest noise in the new Rolls Royce is the ticking of the electric clock. And as a homage, a loving homage, but tongue-in-cheek and irreverent as ever, when he got the Land Rover account, Howard did at 60 miles an hour, the loudest noise in this new Land Rover comes from the roar of the engine. And you can see that it's a absolutely like-for-like shot. This was the first ad that Howard did for Land Rover. How do you feel about billboards? Where's the car? Where's the car? He says, however, we don't mind saying that we personally loathe billboards, it says. Okay, well, this is an ad man cutting his own throat, essentially. But he says that the reason why we don't like billboards is because one of the great advantages of driving a car is you can get out into the countryside, the scenic world that you can go and enjoy whilst driving. Isn't that one of the joys of driving, that you get out of the city and you go and drive and get away from commercial, the modern world and everything? And we have no right to intrude upon that, to ruin that. And so, but you tell us, do you think we should advertise on billboards? Do you think anyone should advertise on billboards? Which again went down like a cup of sick with the rest of the industry. This was his second ad that he did for them. Actually, it's his third because it says part 2 of the Rover ad. So it just starts. It's the week after part 1 appeared, but there's absolutely he just assumes you'd read part 1, you know, kind of. And here is this advertisement with what is possibly the world's first to be continued photograph, shows the front end of the Model 88 station wagon. So it's the first ever to be continued photo. You know the adage, you must always show the product. Howard didn't even mention it in should we advertise on billboards? And he showed half the car here. He gives you an update on billboard query inserted. The recent Rover ad titled, "How do you feel about billboards?" has been inserted in the congressional record by Senator Maureen B. Newberger, etc., etc. So it's news, it's advertorial, it's fun, it's entertaining. It's common for people to do topical ads. You know, topical ads around usually sport. You know, you tie your brand into a sporting event, you tie it into a scientific breakthrough, you tie it into a famous person's achievements. You try and do a tie-in with a famous person, whatever. What Howard did was he tied the Land Rover in with the crime of the century in the United Kingdom. We called it the Great Train Robbery, whereby 15 hardened criminals from the East End of London coshed the train driver on the mail train from Glasgow to London and got away with £1 million. And that was the news at the time. Howard said, Land Rover and crime, preferred by police in 37 countries, and the bandits have at least one. And he uses the fact that they were able to stash 12 mail bags full of money in the back, easily stashed in the back of a Land Rover, comfortably stored away, and what else would you drive? You know, and they could drive across country because they found they found the mail sacks in farmland, so it was easily, you could go off road to avoid the police and roadblocks, etc. It was just crazy, you know, absolutely crazy. Land Rover and crime. Land Rover strikes again. Land Rover strikes again. That was another one. That was under the headlines, 90,000 stolen in bank van ambush and getaway by 8 masked men. Guard felled by Kosh. The London Times described how the armoured car was hijacked. The bandits lay in wait with their vehicles along a hedgerow road at the T-junction between Horton, Kirby and Southend. And the bank van was rammed by the Land Rover. Kind of irreverent. You bet. How about that? If you want one, write in and we'll tell you what it is. It describes the car, but it doesn't tell you what it is. It doesn't tell you who the brand is. But if you want one, we'll let you know. I should very much like to know what it is, where I can see it and drive it, and to receive a free 4-colour brochure that tells me more about it. Yours, thank you very much indeed. But again, no hint that it's Rover or Land Rover. And then finally, Howard, tired of writing in 1966 because his output had been absolutely prolific. And he would invite anybody to write, help me out with these. And this is a letter from John Steinbeck, the Nobel Prize-winning novelist, author of The Grapes of Wrath, of Mice and Men, etc., Cannery Row, etc., etc. And this is him writing to Howard with his suggestions. And what he says is, now you drive a Rover across the country, and that's a good test of any car. How was it? And it says, I don't want to ask Jimmy. Jimmy was the female client. It would sound like a hustle, and it's not. They have already given me what amounts to a permanent loan of the Land Rover. The theory is, I guess, that me driving it and talking and writing about it might sell others. This is influencer advertising in 1964, right? You know, give a Land Rover or a Rover to John Steinbeck. He'll write about it. And isn't that influencer advertising? Back in 1964. Influencer advertising by a Nobel Prize-winning novelist, etc. Again, Howard, way ahead of his time. But is that it, basically? Do you want 5 more minutes? Way ahead of his time in that in 1966, when Howard was just about at the end of his rope as far as writing is concerned, David Brower, the chairman of something called the Sierra Club, which was a conservation society, kind of ramblers. You know what ramblers are? They're walking, you go walking in the countryside, and conservation, trying to keep the environment right. And he came into Howard's agency and he said that the government, that we've been fighting for 5 years to stop the Grand Canyon from being dammed, okay? And we've lost the fight. The bulldozers are in, the concrete's being laid. I have got one last effort to stop this, and I want to write a full-page ad in the New York Times. And I want your art director, the fabulous Mark Larson, to art direct it. And so Howard said, let me look at it. And he said, you know, your problem is with this stuff. He says that you're just depressing the shit out of people. You're telling people there's a problem, and you're making them hate you because they can't do anything about this problem. You're making them angry, and then you're going, isn't it horrible? He said, you've got to give people recourse. You've got to give them something they can do in order to address this situation and correct it. So Howard came up with this idea. He put these coupons on the right-hand side of the page. Now, the coupon was the internet of the day. It's what made Howard's ads interactive, which was a term he actually coined in the 1960s. He said, my advertising is interactive. And the coupons were addressed to you could address your senator, your congressman, the secretary of the interior, the president, and somebody else who's involved in the government. And what he introduced was a feedback loop, which is what interactive advertising is. It's a feedback loop which linked the people who made the decisions about damming the Grand Canyon with the people who thought it was a bad idea. And he ran this ad in the New York Times. It ran the once, and the response was phenomenal. The president, Senator Ewell, who was the Minister of the Interior, said that he couldn't get into his office for the letters that were coming in. And of course, it generated the news coverage that Howard always tried to generate. So it turned it into a cause celeb. So by the time the second ad ran, which was, should we also flood the Sistine Chapel so tourists can get nearer to the ceiling, which had been the reason why if we flood the Grand Canyon, people can get closer to the walls of it in their boats and everything. By the third or fourth ad, the clamor to stop this had become deafening. And by the first ad ran in June 1966. By December 1966, the plans to dam the Grand Canyon were scrapped. Okay, so Howard is largely associated with kickstarting the environmental movement, to the extent that David Brower, who was the head of the Sierra Club, was fired from the Sierra Club for running this ad, which Howard's agency did, Earth National Park, which said actually the whole planet should be regarded as a national park. Let's not just have, there's a certain part of it here, and it's that the whole planet we should regard as under ecological threat. This was in 1966. Dave Brower got fired for doing this, and at the celebration, to celebrate being fired at Howard's agency, according to Howard's wife, Sally, and I think this should be taken with a pinch of salt, because Sally was prone to exaggerate or dramatize, self-dramatize. But she said they were talking, and Dave said, I've been fired, but I'm thinking of setting up my own thing. And Howard said, what are you going to call it? Or Sally said, what are you going to call it? And Brower said, I don't know yet. And Howard said, why don't you call it Friends of the Earth? And that's a good idea. We'll call it Friends of the Earth. And Howard said, move into our offices. I'll give you office space, and you can start the organization from there, and we will do your advertising for you. And this is one of the, again, typical Gossage style of advertising. The need is not really for more brains. The need is now for a gentler and more tolerant people than those who won for us against the ice, the tiger, and the bear. The hand that hefted the axe out of some old blind allegiance to the past fondles the machine gunners lovingly. It is a habit man will have to break to survive, but the roots run very deep. And how appropriate that message is still today, I would suggest. So that's it, basically. That's Howard Gossage. Entertainer, innovator, and very clever, funny man.